some nights. When the autumn wind rattles the windows of my little bed and breakfast, I still think about David Morrison and the wedding suite that sat empty for 3 days. It's been 2 years now, but I swear I can still smell the white roses I had arranged so carefully in that room. Roses that were meant to welcome a bride who never came. My name is Emma Hartwell, and I've been running Rosewood Manor for 8 years now. It's not much to look at from the outside. Just a Victorian house that's seen better days, painted cream with blue shutters that could use a fresh coat. But inside, oh inside, it's magic. Antique furniture passed down from my grandmother. Lace curtains that filter the morning light just so, and rooms that have witnessed more love stories than I could count. Inherited this place from Gran when I was 25, right after my own wedding fell apart. Funny how life works, isn't it? Here I was, broken-hearted and alone, suddenly responsible for a business built on other people's happiest moments. The irony wasn't lost on me, but somehow, watching couples fall in love in these rooms helped heal something inside me that I didn't even know was broken. The morning David called, I was elbow-deep in flour, trying to perfect Gran's blueberry scone recipe for the 100th time. The phone rang just as I was adding the cream, and I almost didn't answer. Thank God I did. Rosewood Manor, this is Emma, I said, balancing the phone between my shoulder and ear while trying not to overmix the dough. Hi, This is going to sound crazy, but do you have any availability for tomorrow night, for a honeymoon suite? His voice was deep, with just a hint of nervousness that made me pause in my stirring. Last-minute honeymoon bookings weren't unusual. Sometimes couples eloped or had sudden plan changes. But something in his tone made me pay attention. Tomorrow night? That's pretty short notice. When did you get married? There was a pause, a long one. We're getting married tomorrow afternoon. Small ceremony. Very, very small. I set down my wooden spoon and pulled out the reservation book, scanning the pages. You're in luck. The Magnolia Suite is available. It's our most romantic room, 4-poster bed, fireplace, and private balcony overlooking the garden. Perfect. That sounds perfect. I quoted him the rate, and he didn't even hesitate before giving me his credit card information. David Morrison. The name read on my confirmation screen. As I was taking down his details, I noticed something odd. And your bride's name for the welcome card? Another pause. Sarah Mitchell. Mitchell? Won't she be Morrison after tomorrow? Oh, right. Yes, Morrison. Sarah Morrison. I made a note, but something felt off. In 8 years of running this place, I'd learned to read between the lines. Nervous grooms were normal, but this felt different, heavier. Would you like me to arrange anything special? Champagne, chocolate-covered strawberries, fresh flowers. Yes, he said quickly. All of it. Everything you can do, make it. Make it beautiful. She deserves beautiful. The way he said it, like he was trying to convince himself of something, made my chest tighten. Of course, What time should I expect you tomorrow evening? Around 7, maybe 8. The ceremony is at 4, so... Perfect. We'll have everything ready." After I hung up, I stared at the phone for a long moment. In all my years of doing this, brides were usually the ones calling, excited and chatty, wanting to know every detail about the room, the amenities, the breakfast menu. Grooms typically left the planning to their future what-tos, only speaking up to ask about Wi-Fi or parking. But David Morrison had sounded like a man carrying the weight of the world. I spent the rest of that day preparing the Magnolia Suite with more care than I'd ever put into any room. I polished every surface twice, arranged white roses and baby's breath in crystal vases, chilled a bottle of champagne, and even drove to the fancy chocolate shop in town for their best strawberries. As I fluffed the pillows on the antique settee, I found myself wondering about Sarah Morrison. What kind of woman inspired such careful attention from her groom? What did she look like? What made her laugh? Was she the type to cry happy tears? Or was she composed and elegant? Standing in that perfectly prepared room as the sun set through the lace curtains, I had no idea that Sarah Morrison would never see any of it. 7 o'clock came and went. Then 8. Then 9. I was pacing the front parlor, checking my phone every 30 seconds, when headlights finally swept across the front windows. I smoothed my dress, a simple blue sundress that Gran always said brought out my eyes, and took a deep breath. The man who walked up my front steps looked nothing like I'd imagined. David Morrison was tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it all day. His suit was expensive but wrinkled. His tie loosened like he'd been tugging at it. But it was his eyes that stopped me cold. I'd seen heartbreak before. I'd lived it myself. But David Morrison's eyes held something deeper than heartbreak. They held devastation. "Mr. Morrison?" I opened the door with my professional smile in place. "Congratulations on your—" "She's not coming." The words hit the night air like stones dropped in still water. I stood there, hand still on the doorknob, processing what he'd just said. "I'm sorry?" He looked past me into the warm light of the entry hall, and I saw his jaw clench. "Sarah, my wife. She's not coming." My first instinct was to ask if everything was all right, if there had been an accident. But something about the way he stood there, shoulders squared like he was bracing for impact, told me this wasn't about car trouble or family emergencies. Would you like to come in? You look like you could use a drink." "Oh?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "A drink? Yes. God, yes." I stepped aside and let him into my home, this stranger carrying his devastation like luggage. He paused in the entry hall, taking in the polished hardwood floors, the antique side table with fresh flowers, the oil paintings of long-dead Hartwells watching from their frames. "This is beautiful," he said quietly. "She would have loved this." "Mr. Morrison, David, please. I know what you're thinking. Left at the altar. Poor bastard. But it's not." He ran a hand through his dark hair. "It's more complicated than that." I led him to the sitting room and poured 2 glasses of the brandy I kept for special occasions. He took his and downed half of it in one swallow. I sipped mine and waited. "We did get married," he said finally, staring into the amber liquid. This afternoon, 3:30, just like we planned. Her sister was there, my best friend, the judge. Very simple. Felt my eyebrows furrow. Then where is she? David looked up at me then, and I saw something in his expression that made my stomach drop. She's on a plane to Seattle with her ex-husband. The words hung in the air between us like smoke from a snuffed candle. Set my brandy down carefully, buying myself time to process what I'd just heard. Her ex-husband, Marcus. The name came out like a curse. Marcus Chamberlain. They divorced 2 years ago. Messy. Custody battle over their daughter, Emma. She's 7. Sarah got primary custody. But Marcus has money, lawyers, and influence. He stood abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the darkened garden. 3 days ago, Marcus showed up at Sarah's apartment, said he'd found a way to get full custody of Emma, some technicality in their divorce decree, something about Sarah's work schedule making her an unfit mother. That's ridiculous, I said without thinking. That's what I said. Sarah's a nurse. She works nights sometimes, but Emma stays with Sarah's mother when that happens. She's a good mother, the best. But Marcus has connections at the family court, and he made it sound like a done deal. David's reflection in the window looked ghostly in the lamplight. Then he made his offer. He dropped the custody case and let Sarah keep Emma. She came back to him. My chest tightened, and she said no. At first, she told him exactly where he could shove his offer. That's the Sarah I fell in love with. Fierce, protective, willing to fight for what's right. He turned back to me, and I saw the pain etched in every line of his face. But then Marcus played his trump card. I didn't want to know. Somehow, I knew that whatever came next would break my heart for this man I'd just met. He said he had pictures, video, from when they were married. Intimate moments that he'd recorded without her knowledge. Said if she didn't come back willingly, he'd make sure those images found their way to her workplace, her daughter's school, everywhere. The brandy turned to acid in my stomach. He blackmailed her, systematically destroyed every option she had. The custody threat was real. He had filed the paperwork. The blackmail was real. He showed her the files on his phone, and the deadline was real. She had to choose. Marry me and lose her daughter and her dignity, or leave with him and protect both. David sat back down heavily, suddenly looking older than his 30-something years. So she married me. At 3:30 this afternoon, Sarah Jane Mitchell became Sarah Jane Morrison for exactly 3 hours and 27 minutes. What happened at 7? Marcus was waiting in the parking lot of the courthouse with a car service and a plan ticket. David's voice cracked slightly. She kissed me goodbye and said she was sorry. That she loved me, but she loved Emma more. That she hoped someday I'd understand. I felt tears prick my eyes. And you let her go, so what choice did I have? Fight for a woman who was being torn in half? Make her choose between the man she loved and the child she'd die for? He looked at me with eyes full of pain. I loved her enough to let her save her daughter. We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of his story settling between us like dust after an explosion. Finally, I found my voice. The reservation. You still came. He smiled sadly. I paid for a honeymoon suite. Seemed ashamed to waste it. Besides, he gestured around the room. She would have loved this place. I thought maybe, somehow, if I was here where we should have been together, it might hurt less. Does it? No, he admitted. It hurts more, but it's a good hurt, if that makes sense. Like the difference between a cut and a surgery. But one is healing you. I understood that distinction better than he knew. Made a decision that would change everything. The room is yours for as long as you need it. No charge for tonight. Emma, I can't let you. Mrs. Morrison paid for it, I said firmly. She was your wife, even if only for 3 hours. That makes it hers, and since she can't use it. David's eyes filled with something that might have been gratitude or might have been relief. Thank you. I showed him to the Magnolia Suite, pointing out the amenities with professional efficiency, while trying not to think about how the romantic touches I'd so carefully arranged now felt like monuments to loss. The champagne on ice, the roses, the chocolate strawberries, all of it meant for a celebration that never came. Breakfast is served from 7 to 10, I said at the door. Coffee's available all night in the kitchen if you need it. And David? He turned back to me. She made the only choice a mother could make. That doesn't make it wrong. After I left him alone with his grief and my carefully arranged romantic setting, I went back downstairs and poured myself another brandy. Larger this time. I had a feeling it was going to be a long night. I was right. Around midnight, I heard footsteps on the stairs. I was in the kitchen, stress baking a batch of chocolate chip cookies that nobody would eat, when David appeared in the doorway. He'd changed out of his wedding suit into jeans and a gray t-shirt that made his eyes look silver in the overhead light. Couldn't sleep? I asked, not really needing an answer. Kept thinking about her putting Emma to bed tonight. Seattle, In his house, he leaned against the doorframe. Something smells good. Cookies, emotional baking. It's a terrible habit. Mind if I join you? I'm pretty emotional myself tonight. Mom, I handed him a spatula and pointed to the bowl of cookie dough. Make them the size of walnuts. Any bigger, and they spread too much. We worked in comfortable silence for a while. The familiar rhythm of scooping and placing oddly soothing. David was careful with each cookie, making sure they were evenly spaced, perfectly round. It was the attention to detail of a man trying to control something, anything, in a world that had spun completely out of his control. You're good at this, I said, as he finished the second tray. Sarah taught me. She loves to bake. He caught his verb tense and corrected himself. Loved. Loves. God. I don't know what tense to use for a wife who's gone but not dead. Present tense, I said firmly. She's still Sarah. She still loves to bake. The circumstances changed, not who she is. He looked at me with something like surprise. You're very wise for someone who runs a bed and breakfast. I didn't always run a bed and breakfast, and wisdom is just pain with good timing. The cookies were ready, and we ate them warm with glasses of cold milk. sitting at the kitchen table like old friends instead of strangers thrown together by circumstance. "Tell me about her," I said. "What made you fall in love with Sarah Morrison?" A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. The first real smile I'd seen from him. She laughs with her whole body. Not just her voice, but her shoulders shake and she tips her head back, and sometimes she snorts a little if something really gets her. What makes her laugh like that? Stupid things. Bad puns, Emma trying to tell jokes she doesn't quite understand yet. That video of the cat that thinks it's a dog. His smile grew. She has this theory that laughter is like a vitamin. You need a daily dose or you get sick. Smart woman. The smartest. She could have been a doctor. You know, had the grades, the determination. But she chose nursing because she said doctors save lives, but nurses save souls. I felt my chest tighten. She sounds remarkable. She is. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "What about you? Ever been married?" "Once, or almost once, depending on how you count it." "What happened?" I hadn't talked about James in years, but something about the midnight hour and David's openness made the words come easier. He decided 3 days before the wedding that he wasn't ready for forever. Took all the wedding gifts and disappeared to California. Left me with a dress I'd never wear and a reception venue I couldn't cancel. I'm sorry. I was 25 and convinced my life was over. Turned out it was just beginning. I gestured around the kitchen. Gran left me this place 6 months later. Said heartbreak was the best qualification for understanding other people's love stories. Was she right? I thought about all the couples I'd hosted over the years. The nervous honeymooners, the anniversary celebrations, the second marriages late in life. Each one had taught me something about love, its fragility, its strength, its infinite variety. Most of the time, love isn't just the happy parts. It's the choosing to stay when staying is hard. It's the sacrifices that don't feel like sacrifices because they're for the right person. I met his eyes. It's letting someone go when holding on would destroy them. David was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, I should hate him, Marcus, for taking her away. But I keep thinking, what if I had a daughter and someone was threatening to take her from me? What wouldn't I do to keep her safe? Even blackmail and manipulation? Maybe. Probably. That's what scares me. He pushed his empty milk glass around the table. What if the only difference between Marcus and me is opportunity? Choice, I said firmly. Marcus chose to use his daughter as a weapon. You chose to let Sarah save hers. That's not a small difference. David, that's everything. We talked until nearly 3 a.m, sharing stories and silences in equal measure. When David finally went back upstairs, I sat alone in my kitchen, surrounded by the smell of chocolate and the memory of his voice, and realized something that should have terrified me. I was falling for a man whose heart belonged to someone else. The next morning, I woke with a headache and the uncomfortable awareness that my life had shifted somehow during those midnight hours. I made coffee extra strong and tried to convince myself that what I was feeling was just sympathy for David's situation. I was setting up breakfast in the dining room when he came downstairs. He looked like he'd actually slept a little, his hair slightly damp from a shower. wearing a blue button-down that made his eyes look more gray than silver. "Good morning," he said with careful cheerfulness. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I expected. Thank you for last night, for listening." "Of course." But I set down his coffee and tried not to notice how our fingers brushed when he took the cup. Professional distance. Emma. The man just lost his wife to blackmail and manipulation. The last thing he needs is his hostess developing inappropriate feelings. "What's your plan for today?" I asked, busying myself with arranging pastries on a serving platter. "I don't know. I took the week off work for the honeymoon. Seems stupid to go back now and try to pretend everything's normal." He sipped his coffee and stared out the window at the garden. "Maybe I'll drive around, see some sights, like a tourist." "Where are you from?" "Boston. I lived there my whole life." "Then you're in luck. New Hampshire in October is perfect for aimless driving. The leaves are at their peak, and there are about a dozen small towns within an hour's drive that are straight out of a postcard." I found myself pulling out maps and making recommendations, writing down the names of antique shops and hiking trails and roadside stands that sold the best apple cider. David listened intently, asking questions about local history and the best routes for scenic views. "You should come with me," he said suddenly. The words hung in the air between us like a bridge I was afraid to cross. "I couldn't. I have guests to." "Do you? Anyone else checking in today?" I checked my reservation book, though I already knew the answer. "No, but I can't just leave." "Why not? When's the last time you played tourist in your own backyard?" He had a point. In 8 years of running Rosewood Manor, I'd rarely left the property except for supplies and errands. I knew every inch of my 10 acres, but I'd never taken the scenic route to North Conway or stopped at the covered bridge that apparently had the best view in 3 counties. "I don't know." "Please." The word was quiet, almost vulnerable. "I don't want to be alone with my thoughts today, and you know all the best places." That's how I found myself an hour later in David's rental car, a silver sedan with GPS that we promptly ignored in favor of my hastily drawn map. I'd changed into jeans and a sweater, tied my hair back, and tried to convince myself this was just being a good hostess. The autumn day was perfect. Crisp air, brilliant blue sky, and trees that looked like they'd been painted by an artist drunk on color. David drove with the windows cracked, letting in the smell of wood smoke and fallen leaves. "Tell me about these places," he said, as we passed a white steepled church surrounded by maples. "Do you know the stories?" I found myself sharing local legends and historical tidbits I'd absorbed over the years. The covered bridge that supposedly granted wishes if you kissed someone while driving through it. The general store that had been run by the same family for 6 generations. The hiking trail where a couple had gotten engaged every October for the past 30 years. Different couples. Same trail. Same magic. "You love it here," David observed as we pulled into the parking area for Cathedral Ledge. "I didn't always. When I first inherited the manor, I felt trapped, like I was stuck running a business built on other people's happiness while my own life stood still." I unbuckled my seatbelt but didn't get out yet. It took me a long time to realize that witnessing other people's joy doesn't diminish your own. It multiplies it. "When did you figure that out?" "Honestly, maybe yesterday, maybe right now was." I looked at him. This man who was supposed to be a stranger, but felt like someone I'd been waiting to meet. Sometimes wisdom really is just pain with good timing. We hiked the short trail to the overlook in comfortable silence, David occasionally stopping to point out a particularly brilliant tree or to help me navigate a rocky section. At the top, the view spread out below us like a painting. Rolling hills covered in autumn fire, the silver thread of the Saco River, and small towns nestled in valleys like secrets. "Sarah would love this," David said quietly. I felt a familiar pang at the mention of her name, followed immediately by guilt for feeling it. "Tell me more about her." "She grew up in a small town like this. Rural Vermont. Population 800 on a good day." He leaned against the rocky outcropping, eyes distant with memory. "Her parents had a farm. Nothing fancy, just enough to get by. And she learned to drive on a tractor when she was 12. "How did you meet?" "Hospital cafeteria. I was visiting my father after his heart attack, and she was on her dinner break. She was sitting alone, reading a paperback romance novel and eating terrible hospital pasta like it was a 5-star meal." His voice softened. "She caught me staring and asked if I wanted to sit down. Said the food was awful, but the company might improve it. Love at first sight? Love at first conversation. She was so present, you know? Not thinking about where she had to be next or what she should be doing instead. You're just completely there, in that moment, talking to a stranger about everything and nothing." I tried to picture them together. David with his careful intensity, and Sarah with her full-body laughter. They sounded perfect for each other, which somehow made the whole situation worse. "When did you know you wanted to marry her?" David was quiet for so long I thought he hadn't heard me. Finally, he said, 6 months ago. We were at her apartment, and Emma was having a nightmare. Sarah went to comfort her, and I could hear them through the bedroom door. Emma was crying about a monster in her closet, and Sarah didn't just tell her there were no monsters. She got a flashlight and they searched every corner together, under the bed, behind the curtains, everywhere. Then Sarah said, "You know what, Em? The monsters are gone now. But let's leave the flashlight here just in case. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you might need help." He turned to look at me, and I saw tears in his eyes. That's when I knew. Not just that I loved her, but that I wanted to learn how to love like that. Practical and fierce and gentle all at once. My heart broke a little more for both of them. She sounds like an amazing mother. The best. That's why. He trailed off, but I knew what he wasn't saying. That's why she chose Emma. That's why she left. Well, we stood in silence for a while, watching the light change on the mountains. Finally, David said, "I should let her go. Really let her go. Stop hoping this is temporary. Should and can are different things. Are they? Or am I just being selfish, holding on to something that was never really mine to begin with?" I thought about my own experience with letting go, the years it took me to stop waiting for James to come back and apologize. Love doesn't have an expiration date, David, but it can transform. Maybe what you're feeling now isn't meant to be let go of. Maybe it's meant to be redirected. Into what? I don't know. Gratitude for having experienced it? Hope that love like that exists? Faith that if it happened once, it can happen again? He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You really believe that? That love can happen again? I have to. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this? We spent the rest of the day exploring small towns and scenic overlooks, talking about everything except the elephant in the room. What happened next? By the time we got back to Rosewood Manor, the sun was setting, and I felt like I'd been away for a week instead of a day. Thank you, David said as we stood in the front hall, for today, for not letting me sit in that room and feel sorry for myself. Thank you for letting me remember what it feels like to be a tourist. We looked at each other for a moment too long, and I felt something shift in the air between us, something dangerous and tempting and completely inappropriate given the circumstances. I gestured vaguely toward the kitchen. Dinner. I should start dinner. Right. Of course. But neither of us moved. We stood there in the golden light filtering through the front windows, and I could feel the weight of all the things we weren't saying. Finally, David broke the spell. I think I'll go upstairs, maybe try to read for a while. Good idea. Dinner will be ready around 7 if you'd like to join me. I'd like that. Very much. After he went upstairs, I stood alone in the entry hall and tried to make sense of what was happening to me. This was wrong on so many levels. David was grieving the loss of his marriage. He was vulnerable and hurt and not thinking clearly. I was taking advantage of his emotional state by developing feelings for him. Except, it didn't feel like taking advantage. It felt like recognition. Like finding something I'd been looking for without knowing I was looking. I made dinner with more care than usual. Herb-crusted salmon, roasted vegetables, a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. Not because I was trying to seduce a grieving man, but because something about the day we'd spent together felt worth celebrating. David came down at exactly 7, having changed into a navy sweater that made him look less formal, more approachable. We ate by candlelight. Not because I was trying to set a romantic mood, but because the dining room looked better that way. This is incredible, he said after the first bite. You're a wonderful cook. Gran's recipes. She said food was just love made edible. Smart woman. The smartest. She would have liked you. What makes you say that? I considered the question while I sipped my wine. She believed that good people revealed themselves in how they treated the vulnerable. Children. Animals. People who couldn't do anything for them in return. I met his eyes across the table. You let the woman you love sacrifice your happiness to save her child. Gran would have called that the mark of a truly good man. David was quiet for a long moment. Some days I wonder if I did the right thing. If I should have fought harder. For what? To make Sarah choose between you and Emma? To turn love into another form of pressure? Maybe. Or maybe I should have found another way. Hired better lawyers. Exposed Marcus somehow. With what resources? In what time frame? David, Marcus spent months planning this. He had money, connections, and most importantly, he had Emma as leverage. You had 3 days. You sound like you've thought about this a lot. I realized he was right. I had been thinking about it, about him, about Sarah and Emma, and the impossible situation they'd all been trapped in. I suppose I have. Why? The question hung between us like a challenge. Why had I spent so much mental energy on the problems of a man I'd just met? Why did his pain feel so personal to me? Because, I said carefully, I've never seen someone love selflessly before. Most people, when they lose someone, they get angry. They blame. They demand answers. But you just accepted that Sarah's love for her daughter was bigger than her love for you, and you found a way to be okay with that. I'm not okay with it. No, but you understand it. That's different. I searched for the right word. That's remarkable. We finished dinner and moved to the sitting room, where I built a fire, and we shared the rest of the wine. The conversation flowed easily, touching on books we'd read, places we'd traveled, dreams we'd abandoned, and ones we still harbored. What would you do if you could do anything? David asked as we watched the flames dance in the fireplace. Travel. Really travel. Not just weekend trips to Boston. I'd love to see the Greek islands, or maybe Tuscany, somewhere with old stones and older stories. I curled up in the armchair, tucking my feet under me. What about you? Before this week, I would have said something about settling down, starting a family, normal dreams. He swirled the wine in his glass. Now. I don't know. Maybe just figure out how to be okay with uncertainty. Uncertainty isn't the enemy. You know, sometimes it's just life making room for something better. Do you really believe that? I'm starting to. Around 11, David announced he should go to bed. We'd both had enough wine to make everything feel slightly soft around the edges, and I was acutely aware of how intimate our conversation had become. Emma, he said as he stood to leave, today was exactly what I needed. Thank you. I'm glad. And he paused at the doorway, looking like he wanted to say something else. Finally, he just said, "Good night." "Good night, David." After he went upstairs, I sat by the dying fire and admitted the truth to myself. I was falling in love with David Morrison. Not just attracted to him, not just feeling sympathy for his situation, but genuinely, deeply falling in love. It was the worst possible timing and the most inappropriate circumstances, but there it was. Somewhere between his story about Sarah teaching Emma to face her monsters and his patient questions about local history, I'd lost my heart to a man whose heart belonged to someone else. The smart thing would be to maintain professional distance until he checked out. Be friendly, but not personal. Helpful, but not involved. Instead, I found myself planning another day trip, wondering what he liked for breakfast, imagining what it would be like to wake up next to someone who loved as deeply and as selflessly as David Morrison. I was in trouble. The next morning brought rain, a steady autumn downpour that turned the world gray and made the manor feel even cozier than usual. I woke early and made David's coffee extra strong, setting out fresh pastries and local honey while I tried to convince myself that whatever I was feeling would pass. David came down wearing jeans and a cable-knit sweater, his hair still damp from the shower. He looked more relaxed than he had since arriving, like a night of actual sleep had done him good. "Morning," he said, accepting the coffee with a grateful smile. "Rain's coming down pretty hard out there. Perfect day to stay inside. I have books, board games, a puzzle that's been mocking me for 6 months." I busied myself arranging muffins on a plate. Or you could just relax, read, sleep late, whatever you need. Actually, I was hoping you might show me around the house. I've only seen the common areas and my room, but this place feels like it has stories. I felt a flutter of pleasure at his interest. It does. Built in 1887 by my great-great-grandfather. He was convinced the world was ending and wanted to create something beautiful that would outlast the apocalypse. Smart man. Did he succeed? Well, the world's still here and so is the house, so I'd say yes. I spent the morning giving David the full tour, sharing family stories and architectural details I'd never bothered to tell other guests. He was genuinely interested, asking questions about the restoration work I'd done, admiring the original details I'd preserved. In the library, he pulled down a first edition Dickens and handled it with the reverence it deserved. "This is incredible. Do you read these?" "Some of them. Others are too fragile or too valuable. But Gran always said books were meant to be read, not just collected. Another wise woman in your family. Wisdom or stubbornness. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference." David laughed, and the sound filled the library like music. "I like your family philosophy." We ended up in the sunroom, where the rain drummed against the windows and created a cozy cocoon around us. David settled into one of the wicker chairs with a biography of Theodore Roosevelt, while I worked on my perpetually unfinished cross-stitch project. It felt domestic in a way that should have alarmed me. Comfortable, right? "Emma," David said after we'd been reading in companionable silence for an hour. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Sure." "Why haven't you remarried? Or found someone new? You're intelligent, beautiful, funny. It seems like you'd have your pick of partners." I set down my needlework and considered how to answer. Honestly, I think I was waiting. For what? For someone who understood that love isn't just the easy parts. Someone who knew that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let go. I met his eyes. "Someone who loved like you loves Sarah." The words hung in the air between us, loaded with meaning I hadn't intended to express so directly. David set down his book and looked at me with an intensity that made my pulse quicken. "Emma, I'm sorry. That was inappropriate. You're dealing with losing your wife, and Your what?" I stood up abruptly, needing distance before I said something that couldn't be taken back. "I should check on lunch. See what we have for Emma." David's voice was gentle but firm. "Your what?" I turned back to face him, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I'm falling in love with you." The confession hung in the rain-soaked air like a live wire. David stared at me, and I couldn't read his expression. Surprise? Dismay? Horror at my terrible timing? He started, then stopped. "That's the most honest thing anyone has said to me in weeks. I'm sorry. I know the timing is awful, and you're not ready to hear this. And I'm probably taking advantage of your emotional state. Stop. David stood and crossed to where I was standing. You're not taking advantage of anything. And the timing. Maybe the timing is exactly what it needs to be. I don't understand. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday. About love transforming instead of ending. About faith that if it happened once, it can happen again. He reached out and touched my cheek, his thumb tracing the line of my cheekbone. I think I've been falling in love with you too. My breath caught. David. I know it's crazy. I know I should probably wait. Grieve properly. Figure out how to be alone before I try to be with someone else. But Emma, when I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to hope. What about Sarah? I'll always love Sarah. What we had was real and beautiful and important. But it's over. Not because we wanted it to be, but because life made it impossible. His hand was still on my face, warm and steady. That doesn't mean my heart has to stop working. It doesn't mean I can't choose to love again. I closed my eyes and leaned into his touch. When I'm scared. Of what? Of being a rebound. Of this being about missing her instead of wanting me. Of falling completely in love with you only to find out I'm just a placeholder. David's other hand came up to frame my face, and I opened my eyes to find him looking at me with an expression so tender, it made my chest ache. Emma Hartwell, he said softly, you are not a placeholder. You're not a rebound. You're not Sarah's substitute. He leaned closer until I could feel his breath against my lips. You're the woman who taught me that love doesn't have to end when it changes form. You're the woman who showed me what it looks like to build a life around other people's happiness. You're the woman who made me remember that I'm allowed to want things for myself. David, may I kiss you? I nodded, not trusting my voice. And then his lips were on mine, soft at first, tentative, asking permission. Then deeper when I kissed him back, my hands fisting in his sweater to pull him closer. He tasted like coffee and possibility, and when we finally broke apart, I was breathing hard. That was, I started, better than I imagined, David finished, and I've been imagining it since yesterday. I laughed, feeling giddy and terrified and hopeful all at once. What happens now? I don't know, but I'd like to find out, with you. We spent the rest of the rainy day talking and kissing and discovering each other in small, careful increments. David told me about his work as an architect, his dream of designing houses that felt like homes. I told him about my plans to expand the manor, maybe add a small restaurant or offer cooking classes. As evening approached, the rain finally stopped, leaving the world washed clean and sparkling. We were in the kitchen making dinner together when David's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and went very still. It's Sarah. My stomach dropped. Answer it. Emma, answer it. David, she's still your wife. David looked at me for a long moment, then swiped to accept the call. Oh. Sarah? Are you okay? Is Emma? I could hear Sarah's voice through the phone, though I couldn't make out the words. David's expression shifted from concern to surprise to something like hope. "Are you sure?" he said. "What about Marcus? What about the custody threat?" More talking from Sarah's end. Ava's eyes found mine across the kitchen, and I saw something in them that made my heart start to race. "Okay," he said finally. "Yes, I'll see you soon." He hung up and stood staring at the phone for a moment. "David?" I said quietly. "What is it?" He looked up at me, and his expression was completely unreadable. "Marcus was arrested this morning for the blackmail, but also for something else. Apparently, he's been embezzling from his law firm for years. The FBI has been investigating him for months." I felt the bottom drop out of my world. She's coming back. She wants to talk, to explain, to see if... He trailed off, but I knew what he wasn't saying. To see if they could pick up where they left off. "Of course," I said, proud of how steady my voice sounded. "Of course she does. Emma, this doesn't change. It changes everything. David." "Good." I turned away from him, focusing on the vegetables I'd been chopping. "She's free now. Free to choose you without sacrificing Emma. That's what you've been hoping for." "Have I? Haven't you?" I felt him move behind me, felt his hands settle on my shoulders. 2 days ago, yes, absolutely. But Emma, that was before you met me. "I know." I shrugged out of his touch and turned to face him. "But I'm not going anywhere. And she's your wife. Your actual, legal wife who you married for love, not convenience." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you need to talk to her. You need to find out what this means for both of you. And you need to do it without worrying about me." David stared at me for a long moment. "And if I choose her?" The question felt like a physical blow, but I kept my expression neutral. "Then I'll be happy for both of you, and maybe a little heartbroken, but mostly happy. And if I choose you, then we'll figure it out. Together." "Emma, when is she getting here?" "Tomorrow afternoon." Nodded, filing that information away. "Then we have tonight." "What do you mean?" I stepped closer to him, close enough to smell his cologne and see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes. "I mean, whatever happens tomorrow, we have tonight. And I don't want to waste it worrying about things we can't control." David's hands came up to cup my face again. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure that I'm falling in love with you. I'm sure that you're falling in love with me, Pa. I'm sure that tomorrow might change everything." I went up on my toes and kissed him softly. "Sure that tonight is ours." And we made love that night in the Magnolia Suite, surrounded by the roses and candles I'd arranged for a bride who never came. It was tender and desperate and perfect. And afterward, as we lay tangled together in the antique 4-poster bed, I tried to memorize everything about the moment. The way David's breathing felt against my neck, the weight of his arm across my waist, the rain starting up again against the windows, the certainty that tomorrow might take it all away. "Whatever happens," David whispered into the darkness, "I want you to know that these 3 days with you have changed me. You've changed me." "How?" "You've taught me that love doesn't have to be desperate, that it can be generous, that choosing someone doesn't have to mean clutching them so tightly you break them." I turned in his arms so I could see his face in the dim light. "You taught me those things too." What if this is it? What if tomorrow she asks me to come home with her? then you'll have to decide what your heart wants more, the love you lost or the love you found. And if I choose wrong, there is no wrong choice. David, there's just choice. And whatever you decide, it will be because you're following your heart, not your fear. We made love again in the early hours of the morning, slow and sweet and tinged with the knowledge that it might be goodbye. When I woke up, David was already gone. I found him in the kitchen, fully dressed, sitting at the table with cold coffee and a letter in his handwriting. "Leaving?" I asked, though the answer was obvious. I thought it would be easier for both of us. The letter? Everything I wanted to say and couldn't. Everything I felt and couldn't express. He stood and handed it to me. "Don't read it unless you choose her." "Yeah." I took the letter and set it on the counter without looking at it. "David." "Yeah? Whatever you decide, don't choose out of guilt. Don't choose me because you feel sorry for me, and don't choose her because you feel obligated. Choose whoever makes you feel most like yourself." He crossed to me and kissed me one last time, soft and lingering. "I love you, Emma Hartwell. I love you too." After he left, I sat alone in my kitchen, holding his letter and trying to decide whether I was brave enough to wait for an answer I might not want to hear. I was. The next week passed in a blur of normal activities that felt anything but normal. Had new guests check in, a retired couple celebrating their 40th anniversary who reminded me why I loved this business. I baked and cleaned and answered reservation calls and tried not to check my phone every 5 minutes. David didn't call. He didn't text. He didn't email. Thursday. Exactly 1 week after he'd left, I was in the garden cutting late-season roses when I heard a car in the driveway. My heart jumped, but I forced myself to keep cutting, to not look up, to not hope. "The roses are beautiful," a woman's voice said behind me. I turned around and came face to face with Sarah Morrison. She was smaller than I'd imagined, maybe 5'4", with auburn hair and green eyes that held a lifetime of strength. Pretty, but not beautiful in any conventional sense. The kind of woman whose attractiveness came from intelligence and warmth rather than perfect features. "You must be Emma," she said. "I'm Sarah. I know who you are." I set down my pruning shears and wiped my hands on my jeans. "Is David with you?" "No, he's in Boston, packing." My heart sank. "Congratulations. I'm happy for both of you." Sarah tilted her head, studying me with curious eyes. "Are you? Really?" "Yes," I said, and was surprised to find that it was mostly true. "I'm sad for me, but happy for you. You get your family back, oh. Can we talk, please?" I gestured toward the patio furniture, and we sat down facing each other across the small, wrought iron table. Up close. I could see why David had fallen in love with her. There was something magnetic about Sarah Morrison, a quality that made you want to lean closer, to hear what she had to say. "He told me about you," she said without preamble. "About these past 3 days, about how you made him feel." I kept my expression neutral. "What did he tell you?" that you saved him, that when he was drowning and losing me, you taught him how to breathe again. Sarah's eyes were steady on mine. That he's in love with you. Sarah, let me finish. Please. She took a deep breath. Marcus is going to prison. The custody threat is gone. Emma and I are free to live our lives however we choose. And for about 24 hours, I thought that meant David and I could pick up where we left off. Oh. But the man who came to see me in Seattle isn't the same man I married. He's more stronger, more sure of himself, more generous with his heart. Sarah smiled sadly. You did that. In 3 days, you gave him something I couldn't give him in 2 years. I felt tears prick my eyes. What did I give him? Permission to love without losing himself. I spent so much time being grateful that he loved me despite Emma, despite my complicated life, despite all my baggage. But you loved him because of who he is, not in spite of what he carries. I don't understand. David came to Seattle to see if we could rebuild our marriage. Instead, he spent 3 hours explaining why he couldn't, why loving you had taught him that he deserved better than grateful. That we both did. My heart was racing. What are you saying? I'm saying that I love David Morrison enough to let him go. Really let him go, so he can choose love instead of obligation. Sarah reached across the table and took my hand. I'm saying that he's driving back here right now to ask if you meant it when you said you'd figure it out together. I stared at her. This remarkable woman who was giving up her second chance at happiness so that David could have his first chance at real love. Why? I whispered. Why would you do that? Because David was right. Love isn't supposed to be desperate. It's supposed to be generous. Sarah squeezed my hand. And because Emma needs to see what it looks like when adults choose love over fear, what will you do now? Live, or really live, but instead of just surviving, maybe go back to school, finish that nursing degree I never completed, maybe travel with Emma, show her the world beyond small towns and custody battles. Sarah's smile was genuine. Maybe fall in love again, with someone who sees me as a gift instead of a complication. You're incredible, I said, meaning it. So are you. Take care of him, Emma. He's one of the good ones. I know. Sarah stood to leave, then paused. Oh, and Emma? He left something for you, the Magnolia Suite, and said you'd know what it means, so after she left. I climbed the stairs to the Honeymoon Suite with my heart hammering against my ribs, and on the antique settee where I'd arranged chocolate strawberries for a bride who never came, David had left a single white rose and a note. Emma. This room was supposed to be the beginning of my marriage to Sarah. Instead, it became the beginning of my love for you. Whatever happens next, I want you to know that these roses, this room, this place will always mean hope to me, always yours. David. I was still holding the note when I heard another car in the driveway. This time, I ran. David was getting out of his car when I burst through the front door, still clutching the rose and his note. He looked up at me with an expression of hope and uncertainty and love so pure it took my breath away. Did you mean it? He called out. About figuring it out together? I ran down the front steps and launched myself into his arms. rose and all. "Yes," I said against his neck. "Yes, I meant it. Even though it's complicated? Even though I come with baggage and a failed marriage and no guarantees? Especially because of those things." I pulled back to look at him. David Morrison, I love you not in spite of your complications, but because of how you handle them. Because you love generously. Because you choose hope over fear. Sarah said you'd understand. She's remarkable. Uayu, you chose well the first time. And the second time? I kissed him, right there in my driveway, surrounded by autumn leaves and afternoon light, and the promise of whatever came next. The second time, I said against his lips, you chose forever. 6 months later, David and I were married in the garden behind Rosewood Manor, surrounded by friends and family and the roses that had bloomed again in the spring. Sarah was there with Emma, who served as our flower girl, and declared the whole thing better than a fairy tale because it's real. Our honeymoon suite was the Magnolia Room, of course. The same room where David had spent his first night as a married man alone. Where we'd fallen in love over midnight cookies and honest confessions. Where white roses had waited for a bride who never came, until they found the bride who was always meant to be there. As we danced to our first song as husband and wife, At Last by Etta James, because David said it was the most honest song he'd ever heard, I caught sight of our wedding guest book. The first entry was from Sarah. Written in her neat handwriting, love isn't about holding on tight. It's about loving generously enough to let go when necessary, and trusting that true love always finds its way home. Congratulations to David and Emma. May your love story be as generous as your hearts. Later that night, as we lay tangled together in the four-poster bed where our love story had begun, David traced circles on my bare shoulder and said, "Do you think we'll tell this story to our children someday?" What story? About the bride who never came? About how their parents found each other in the ruins of someone else's fairy tale and built something better? I thought about that. About the strange and beautiful way love can grow in the most unlikely soil. About how sometimes the best beginnings come from the most painful endings. About how 3 days could change everything. Yes, I said finally, but we'll tell them the real story. About how love isn't a fairy tale. It's better. It's real. And real is messier. And stronger. And more generous. And more lasting. David kissed the top of my head, and I felt him smile against my hair. I love our real story. Mrs. Morrison. I love it too. Mr. Morrison. Outside our window, the roses that had waited so patiently for their bride perfumed the night air with the scent of new beginnings. And in the morning, we would wake up in the room where love had found its way home at last. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with someone else's ending. Sometimes the bride who was meant to be there is the one who was there all along, waiting in the ruins of other people's fairy tales to build something real. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get to discover that the most generous thing love can do is not just hold on, but know when to let go and when to begin again.